This is episode 556 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, a lot going on as we quickly approach the Thanksgiving holiday and what ultimately typically becomes the calm before the storm here with the holiday season before we jump into the next legislative session. But right now, our primary focus is, as it has been in many ways, the goings on of the Environmental Improvement Board. And the hearings are off and running. I was there with bells on Monday morning, talking to the EIB. I testified to them. They have received thousands of emails from folks at KeepYourCarsNM.com. You can go and still last second make your feelings known. You could also testify virtually, testify in person, go to the Environmental Improvement Board and find their contact information. Pamela is the woman's name. She's been fairly helpful throughout this entire process. But there is a lot going on. I want to give you a few details on the Environmental Improvement Board testimony and some of the things I saw and heard yesterday. But Wally, before we get into that, just your thoughts on where things stand with this board.
Yes, they've been given their marching orders from the administration, and is to put that into play so that we can be like California, and our governor can get her next job if she doesn't get appointed or elected to something else with an environmental group or who knows what it was going to be. And here's the thing, you can hate EVs, you can love them, you can think they're the best thing in the world, but they're not up to the challenge in terms of the scope and scale that they're trying to make happen. And, it's one of those I've even seen, of all places, in the Albuquerque Journal. Good job, guys. It's like, hey, this will just have to be undone by somebody else because we're seeing that the car manufacturers are having to back away from them because the public doesn't want them. They're extremely expensive. Charging is a disaster. It's not good for anybody but the wealthiest Americans. And, I do not believe that there's enough money in the world to subsidize our way to everyone having an electric vehicle anytime soon. And yet here we are forcing this through a la California style. And it'll be interesting to see what they do. If I could be so bold as to make a prediction, I think they're going to ram this thing through, and then somebody in the future will have to clean up the mess that happens. But it's certainly a situation that's very dynamic. And then the final thing is that, hey, in Washington we have created massive inflation in our economy. And back when interest rates were between 0, 2, 3, 4%, you could finance a lot of infrastructure and finance a lot of cars and other things at a very, very low price. Well, that's no longer the case. And there's a lot of things that make sense at 2% interest rates that now make no sense at 8%. And just adding, and it is ironic that something like the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually increases inflation and was supposed to provide all this infrastructure, new energy things, actually makes it harder, more expensive, and less likely to ever work. Some of their new energy type programs like electric vehicles.
No doubt, Wally. And so I'll go through a little bit of the process and where things stand. And as much as the Rio Grande Foundation has invested in how much we are going to fight at the EIB, I agree with you that they were put there for a reason. The ties that many of these people have to environmental groups. When you are, there's an old line about when you are paid to ignore basic facts, you can still ignore basic facts, and a lot of these people are paid or
Paul, you pay
involved.
me enough and I will deny gravity. Let's put it
Thank you.
that way. So,
Exactly. So we'll talk about that. No, just kidding. The uh, the situation is that this is a quasi judicial hearing, and what is going on, if you check out the live stream, for example, of the EIB meetings, is that you have attorneys on both sides presenting facts and data, at least theoretically, to the board. Uh, the environmental side is environmental groups and the city of Albuquerque, which their clean air board. We'll talk about what happened at city council this past week, but that all ties into the situation. The local clean air board seems to be tag teaming with the administration, the environmental division there at in Santa Fe, to provide their factual testimony, such as it is. The Car Dealers Association, with Pete Domenici Jr. leading them, and an attorney named Maxwell, who's out of Hobbs Lee County, testifying virtually, also against it. So that you have those two basic teams. So they'll have expert witness and cross examination and that kind of thing. The EIB members are sitting there on stage. This is all being done at the Bar Association, interestingly enough, here off of Masthead in Albuquerque, off of Jefferson. And it is interspersed with public comment. So they'll go from the various hearing aspects to people commenting. Like I said, I had the opportunity for 3 minutes to talk yesterday. I have a whole laundry list at Heirs of Enchantment of problems with electric vehicles. I basically got halfway through that. There's much more to be said about electric vehicles, but I specifically talked about how this is not necessarily altering the overall pollution situation. It is changing the pollution from tailpipes here in Albuquerque to mining over in third world countries for cobalt and other rare earth minerals, and how that has to tug at the heartstrings. That has to hit those environmental people, either testifying or on the board. At some point, they have to understand, and it's one of Thomas Sowell, the economist's favorite lines, that there are no solutions, only trade-offs. And every technology, you had horses prior to vehicles. They had many problems, safety being primary one of them.
Manure
being another one.
Yeah, and there's historical. I've read a lot of history about the bad manure days. So
cars clearly cleaned up the manure situation, but they obviously, especially in the early days, the engines were not very clean, and they rapidly grew cleaner and cleaner over time, and ultimately part of that effort resulted in the California Air Resources Board, which we are trying to follow, not because we have a particular smog issue or serious air quality issues driven by automobiles. And something else I was learning is, they talk about ground level ozone. The reports that I've read say that ground level ozone, which is one of the pollutants they're talking about, is actually worse in rural areas than it is in urban areas.
Right.
And it obviously has a lot to do with other factors besides automobiles.
Like sagebrush, for example, is a very big ozone precursor that we don't want to talk about.
Yeah, and ozone is also heightened or increased by sun and heat, two of the things that we have in great supply here in New Mexico during the summer. So, there's just a lot of exterior challenges. Now, on a more amusing note, some of the lead scientists, I use that with air quotes, on the city/environmental side were wearing masks. So there was a woman from the environmental department who provided expert scientific data wearing a mask at the testimony stand, which just shows that science within a very narrow area may be something that someone has facility with, but once you get out of their very narrow area of scientific knowledge, they either value the virtue signaling more,
Right.
or they just are unwilling or unable to read basic data. And there was another woman who testified as a member of the public, also wearing a mask. Needless to say, I took pictures and posted them on my social media account. So there's that. And yeah, there's just all kinds of serious issues. But the leading theme of the pro uh, EV mandates side was, I have an electric vehicle. It's inexpensive, convenient, et cetera for me. So we should go through with this mandate. And,
Right.
you know, unfortunately, the reality is that Albuquerque is not the rest of New Mexico. I'm not saying because we want Albuquerque to be like New Mexico, but because Albuquerque is both the largest by far city in the state and centrally located, you tend to have people coming from Albuquerque and Santa Fe to testify and share their thoughts. And it's just uh, you get a skewed sample in these kinds and other kinds of public hearings. I've often said, and this is not a legislative hearing, and that was one of my other points, is that this should be done by elected officials, not not an appointed, unelected body. But I've often said that the quickest solution for what ails New Mexico would be to move the state capital to Hobbs,
Yes.
because you'd get a lot different approach from folks testifying, coming to Hobbs, and uh, just the political atmosphere in general. So anyway, it's there's still time remaining. They may go into Thursday. We don't know exactly when they will come up with a final decision. There could be lawsuits. There were people who have clear conflicts of interest on the Environmental Improvement Board, and other ties to environmental groups. I mean, the governor appointed these people. She appointed them primarily. Not everybody is clearly identified as a environmental activist. There are people on both sides, but when she appointed people that she knew she wanted to carry her message, the governor was not shy about plucking people right out of environmental groups, et cetera. So fascinating stuff. Check it out online. Attend in person if you can. On one related note, I was very heartened and pleased that both houses of the legislature, the Republican caucuses, have sent formal letters to the EIB and publicly saying that they oppose the EV mandate. Republicans take a lot of guff in this state. They're definitely a minority when it comes to the legislature and virtually all public offices. But all Republicans, the House sent their letter and the Senate sent their letter. And I think it is very important and could be very useful in a campaign setting in 2024 as we get this ball rolling with some of these mandates. The 7% is already baked in. We're going to be dealing with that. So, good stuff there by the House and Senate Republican caucuses. So, want to acknowledge that. You can find their letters on heirsofenchantment.com.
Yeah, and Paul, you use quasi judicial process. That's the polite way to put it. Kangaroo court's another. It's one of those. It's these hearings. The administrative law part is a little bit loosey goosey. I'm always reminded of the scene in Animal House where they decide whether the fraternity question is going to be kicked out of the college, but there's a lot of people saying a lot of things, and it is a very interesting process. And, one thing I'll say about the process positively is everybody gets to talk. It's interesting. Not everybody, and most of the time they have a very narrow view of things, and they want what they want, and the facts and logic and thinking don't necessarily follow it. There's a lot of emotion in these things, but we'll see. We will see what happens. So, when do you think it'll conclude? Do they have a fixed time, or
They know it was destined to go Monday through Wednesday. Uh, There will be public testimony as late as Wednesday evening. I will be
Hmm.
back over there on Wednesday for at least part of the show, and it may go into Thursday if
Yeah.
they have a lot of testimonials. So, um, yeah, I do agree that this is at very least something that should be done in a format where you have elected officials
Yeah.
whose political careers are at stake, not a unelected body. And you know, that's just the way, unfortunately, this governor operates. That's the way radical environmentalists love to operate. And with that, we will get into recapping what happened in the elections last week, which also will lead us to some city council conversations. But let's start off with kind of a national appraisal. I think from a Republican perspective, a lot of people felt their inner id come out when Vivek Ramaswamy, the presidential candidate, went after Rhonda Romney McDaniel hammer and tongs in the debate. Really putting her on the spot for poor performance in a lot of these national races. Now, this was an off year for many New Mexicans, not everybody, but in Albuquerque, we didn't have a mayoral race. So it's an off year. That's why results were 19% vote of the vote came out. Las Cruces did have a mayoral election, so that probably boosted their turnout. But around the country, you had Andy Beshear, the Kentucky governor, incumbent Democrat, managed to win in a deep red and trending redder state, Kentucky. The Virginia legislature wound up moving towards the Democrats, uh, despite Youngkin's, the Republican governor's relative popularity. You had Mississippi's Republican governor winning re-election, but you just generally had a trend towards Democrats and other issues winning in Ohio. The abortion ballot measure issue won overwhelmingly 57%. And I think abortion is an issue that Republicans, conservatives in general, are really still wrestling with, that they haven't found a sufficiently effective way to kind of make that a winning issue for them in some way, shape, or form. It certainly played a role in Michelle Lujan Grisham's reelection in 2022. She really didn't run on anything besides abortion and Donald Trump being a really, really bad, mean, nasty guy. Uh, Everything else was punted until we, get here to mandating electric vehicles, for example. So that issue remains out there. And from that perspective, I'm not going to say that Ramaswamy's critique is entirely warranted. It's uh, a reality that abortion became a much more salient issue when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade and sent it to the states, and that's made the issue a very, uh, very salient and important issue in a way that it had not prior to Roe v. Wade. I think a lot of people thought, oh, it'll never happen. And now it's happened, and it's affecting elections across the country. And the Republicans managed to be caught flat footed and not have a game plan, by the way, that could work effectively in, say, states of the Deep South where you have Republican strongholds, Ohio versus New Mexico, California, and others. Very hard to come up with some kind of coherent policy. But that's not an issue the Rio Grande Foundation deals with, but we certainly have to deal with the aftermath of race after race where politicians get elected based on very minimal, scanty details of their future endeavors and plans. On a brighter note, and kind of highlighting the fact that issue-based campaigns, and these are kind of our bread and butter. Unfortunately, New Mexico, with its constitutional amendment process, doesn't get a lot of issue campaigns. But in Colorado, they came after the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights yet again. If you gave me a magic wand and told me one bill, Paul, you get one bill to pass in New Mexico, the taxpayer's Bill of Rights would be it. Colorado's had it since the 90s, and that's one of the reasons Colorado has just completely boomed. Now, the politicians of Colorado, it's a blue state. It's maybe I think Polis is better than Michelle Lujan Grisham, but that's a low bar indeed. They had Proposition HH on the ballot, which would have essentially defanged the taxpayer's Bill of Rights in that state. Tabor, as they call it, allows all government at all levels to grow by the combined rates of inflation and population growth. If government wants more money than that, they have to ask the voters. If they want to raise taxes, they have to ask the voters. It is an incredibly powerful law, and HH restrained would have voters undermined or voted against HH, which would have undermined the taxpayers' Bill of Rights by about approximately 60 to 40.
Yeah, so 60-40 vote, 60 voted to keep it the way it was.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So another back to the drawing board effort. At this point, the anti-Tabor folks up in Colorado are kind of starting to resemble the Coyote from the Coyote Roadrunner cartoons. They have kept coming after and after the taxpayer Bill of Rights because nothing drives a progressive politician nuts more than not being able to spend every last dime that comes into their coffers. And in New Mexico, we have no limits on state spending, and we have an unprecedented oil and gas boom that is being frittered away completely by our governor and the Democrats in the legislature. So, in terms of local and New Mexico issues, Santa Fe adopted the excise tax on houses.
And I just want to be go on record as say, wow, I said I didn't know how that was going to turn out. I really didn't, but 73 to 27,
Yeah.
they decided, and so I guess everyone who thinks their house will never get to $1 million in their lifetime must have voted for that. That's a pretty that almost nothing wins by that margin anymore.
Yeah. And we've worked at the Rio Grande Foundation in Santa Fe on certain issues, but this one really, it was a classic soak the rich, tax the rich kind of thing. Even though the median home price in Santa Fe is $560,000+, there is an inflation adjuster in the bill, but I think it's going to be outpaced by housing prices in Santa Fe. It's also not going to effectively bring lower cost housing, more affordable housing to Santa Fe. Just the dynamic of putting more money into a pot for affordable housing is going to drive the price of affordable housing up unless you expand the pot of affordable housing in Santa Fe. You're going to continue to have this problem. So that was that's a clear-cut issue that the Rio Grande Foundation would likely really oppose. I did one op-ed on it in Santa Fe New Mexican, but I read the tea leaves, and this was just such a cookie-cutter progressive agenda item that I knew that in today's times and climate, Santa Fe voters weren't going to come to their senses like they did on the soda tax several years ago. So Santa Fe is kind of one of those places where we will pick our battles very judiciously. In terms of, let's go to Las Cruces next. The mayor, Eric Enriquez, I believe is his name, kind of a moderate in the sense of a Miyagishima type person. They use that instant runoff voting, and he managed to gain the vote total. I went to his website. I don't know much about the guy, but he definitely seems to be a reasonable guy. Don't know what that city council is going to look like. Doña Ana County, Las Cruces have moved way to the left in recent years, and that's affected all of New Mexico's political situation. Now, coming here to Albuquerque, status quo by and large at city council. Dan Champagne is going to be to the right of Trudy Jones, but it's pretty status quo now. Jeff Hain, if he were to pull off an upset and beat the progressive candidate Rogers in a runoff election in District 6, that would definitely improve the overall council, but
And I think that
chances are
that would give the possibility of overriding vetoes, as I
on certain things,
on
yeah.
certain things. If that were to happen, if Rogers wins, the odds of that are very, very low. But it's still, having said that, there's still a group of counselors, as things stand, way more practical and common sense and way less progressive than just a few short years
Yeah,
ago.
and kudos to Carol White and the Restaurant Association and the Help Coalition, all the folks that were engaged in those races. Makes a difference to have the business community involved. And while we're going to talk a little bit about some of the less exciting things going on at City Council, they don't always vote correctly, but on a lot of the bright line, yes and no questions, they do the right thing when push comes to shove. But in the Albuquerque Public Schools School Board, Peggy Muller Aragon, who's kind of been the intellectual leader of the non-union faction of the school board, lost her race on the west side. Very unfortunate. Not a surprise, given the unions have money to throw around. This is their thing, and they are the best funded special interest group in these races. Unfortunately, the business community hasn't engaged in quite the same way on school board races as they have successfully at city council. And I totally understand that. But uh, when you have one side able to put in pretty much unlimited money, that's the side that's going to tend to win. So it was a very close race. But Peggy Muller Aragon in a three-way race did go down to a union financed candidate. So that definitely detracts overall from school board. But we'll see how that body APS operates in the weeks and months to come. And moving on to city council. So the day after the election, so on Wednesday, I I think it makes some sense to. Oh, and Brooke Bassan won a very narrow re-election, which is relevant as it pertains to the next topic up. There were a couple of issues at City Council in Albuquerque that I think are immensely relevant. One was the Air Board, Dan Lewis, trying to bring some accountability and transparency to the Albuquerque Clean Air Board. Now, I mentioned their role in this EIB hearing. There's also things that they are attempting to do that will undermine our business friendliness and our ability to attract businesses. Uh, this is classic so-called progressive left-wing politics. At least in the modern era, they love nothing more than to put up these unelected boards that operate with very little public oversight and accountability, and then they make these very radical decisions that affect all of us, often in very negative ways. So,
Yeah, that have the impact of law
yep,
without ever going through a legislature and having intent. The some of the most quote unquote powerful laws have never touched a legislative body in New Mexico recently. So
yeah, and Dan did get a reform measure passed through City Council on a 5-4 basis, which astute observers will know that 5-4 basis is nice, but it doesn't get you to the promised land. Now, any day, any hour here, Mayor Keller could uh, have a final decision on this. I have been told that a major corporation is poised to bring 1,000 jobs to the city of Albuquerque, but they want this board to be reined in and be more accountable to democratically elected folks like city council. They don't want them operating in private and beyond the scope of public accountability and enacting very radical rules. So we'll see what happens with Mayor Keller and his veto pen, possibly. He, on a 5-4 bill, he could easily veto it, or if he's willing to suffer the slings and arrows from some of the radical environmental folks that ultimately I know form his base politically. We'll see what happens with that. But that is something very much we'll be watching and probably commenting on next week, because he's supposed to have 72 hours from the time he gets the bill. And, I don't know how quickly It seems like this happened last Wednesday. You would think that they could find their way to Keller's office, but maybe there's some probably behind the scenes wrangling taking place, meetings, and a lot of arguments and discussions. In other news, and I had the pleasure of talking to Channel 7 KOAT about this, and this is where you run up against the, I don't know, bad ideas, bad politics of city councilors that you just can't overcome on a 6-3 basis. These people made the free bus system permanent in the city. Now, I want to be very clear. The 3 no votes were Louis Sanchez, Renee Grout, and Dan Lewis.
Mm-hmm.
That means that Trudy and Brooke, the ostensible coalition of the sane, went ahead and supported this incredibly bad policy. Now, as I told Channel 7, and I read the study that came out, and I think we talked about this briefly. This study was...
The study,
yes,
air quotes,
was ridiculous. It did nothing of the sort in terms of justifying a yes vote on the bus program. It was absolutely... it remains deeply problematic, and it's not a problem that's going to be able to be resolved in the not too distant future. They're unable to provide timely service on numerous routes. That whole, I don't know what they call it, the ART light on Coors. Mm-hmm. So we don't have, thank God, a dedicated lane on Coors, because I live off of Coors, and that would be just destruction of that particular road if they did that like they did Central. But those buses have not been run for months. The schedule has been lengthened in terms of the gaps between the buses. This free bus situation is destroying the bus system in Albuquerque and not helping at all, at probably harming dramatically crime and other issues that we have in our city. In fact, the Walgreens on Central, I believe it's San Mateo, maybe Louisiana, one of those areas in the so-called International District, just finally closed this week. So yet another hit to that particular part of town. I'm not going to blame it on free buses, but I'll say that things have not gotten better with the free bus program.
No, and Paul, it's much more complicated than this, but the bus system in Albuquerque, one of its primary uses is turned into an organized crime shoplifting escape system, and that's one of the things. If you don't have to pay and there's no accountability and there's a lot of crime, and it's interesting, you would think that a bus system could be positive. Oh, it's mass transportation. You don't have to take cars. People don't need a car. And in New Mexico and in Albuquerque, it just seems like it goes the other way. It's not helping the city, and we'll see what happens. So will they kill it with freeness? You know what I mean? It's like nothing's more expensive than a free government program. And this is one of those that, there's certainly no indication that unless they can get some more drivers, the bus system's dying a kind of not all that slow death here in Albuquerque.
Yeah. We talked about how ridership has plummeted since COVID-19, before and after. I see no signs that it or other transit operations across the country will recover anytime soon. And safety is obviously not just a problem here in Albuquerque. Safety has become an increasingly serious issue across the country when it comes to mass transit. And there's so many reasons for that I just can't go into. But I think folks understand that in these post-COVID days, being in a setting with a lot of strangers together is much more of a fraught proposition than it seemed to be before. And I think mass transit is not going to come back for a very long time, if ever, which circles back, by the way, to the Environmental Improvement Board, because let's just say I have a friend, and you also know this intuitively. The environmental impact of the EV versus a gas powered vehicle, it's different, but it's very difficult to really say one is superior to the other purely on the environment.
It's total apples and oranges comparison for sure.
But I have a friend who lives in the DC area, and he has never been a fan of driving.
Mm-hmm.
DC has one of the better transit systems in the country, but
Billions of dollars.
absolutely. And I've ridden it many times.
Yeah, it's very nice. It's
Metro,
amazing what $10 or $20 billion can buy you.
And I've also ridden buses in both Washington as well as Albuquerque. So folks can rest easy knowing that I am at least familiar with the city of Albuquerque bus system. Did it more in the DC area, but the point is that if you are focusing on green outcomes, there's no question that high ridership transit systems are the green way of mass transit. Now, having one or two people on a city bus or even a DC Metro car does not make it green. There is pollution.
It's probably the most pollution per
Exactly.
ridership mile. Nothing's worse than a bus with a driver and two people in it. So
Exactly. So, green is variable based on the number of people you have, but transit, if you have them full, is the green mode of transit. And so, I think the fact is that maybe not due to COVID, but over decades and decades of government heavily financing mass transit systems across the entire country, including right here in New Mexico, they have kind of come to the realization that you can't sell fetch. Fetch is not going to happen. So we're going to go with the electric vehicle model. And both of them detract in significant ways from your individual freedom. Transit only goes certain places at certain times. You can be observed in a public place, for better or for worse. Electric vehicles as well, they're hooked up to the grid. The governing authorities have tremendous say-so on what you do with your electric vehicle. Gas-powered vehicles are the ultimate freedom machine. You can go anywhere you want at any time of day, and nobody can tell you any different, absent a physical roadblock on the side of the road or in the middle of the road with your gas-powered vehicle. And I believe ultimately, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, this is what we're debating in this EV standoff. They've given up on mass transit as being kind of the let's shoehorn everybody into that, and now it's electric vehicles.
Yes, and you hear a lot of things. Well, Europe has trains everywhere, and one of the things that interested me about that is how few places you can go on those trains. So yeah, you can go anywhere in Europe that the train goes, but it cuts out like 80% of the landmass in terms of being able to get there. And yeah, there's a lot of discussion about not so gradually easing people's freedom to transport themselves around, and this kind of moves you in that direction. That's for sure.
Yeah, and Europe is a very different place. You can walk through a lot of cities, but transit there is not as big of a percentage of overall commuting, percentage market share as you would think. It's great if you're a tourist because it goes to pretty much all the tourist locations,
Right.
but not everybody lives in great proximity to some of the high-speed trains and other opportunities there. And you have a tremendous international European airline system that gets you from place to place very quickly. When we were in Spain back in 2008, we considered taking the trains from Madrid to Barcelona, and instead we flew because it was so much more cost effective, even with all the subsidies that are available in Europe for those transit systems. So back to Albuquerque City Council. During the wake of the initial aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, Mayor Tim Keller spent 97,000 of our tax dollars to publish a book, sold just under 100 copies, and the inspector general of the city trashed it as a waste of taxpayer money. I talked to Channel 7 about that. You can read the IG's report as well. This is just progressive arrogance at its finest. Look, I am all for a objective analysis of the performance of any government, and I think we need more of this. An objective analysis of government policy making in the wake of things like the COVID-19 pandemic. But this is nothing of the sort. This is a paean to Mayor Keller and just him in general, but his approach to COVID-19, which really wasn't anything but doing what Michelle Lujan Grisham basically told him to do.
Yeah, he cut really no new ground. It was one of those. He was a scepter of policy made elsewhere.
Exactly.
For the overwhelming. And so, Paul, are we going to write our struggle, how Paul and Wally made it through COVID and kept the podcast going? It's just, it's.
I don't think our struggle is a good copy for a book, but
I know, but
it's better than my struggle. But it's definitely got some problems there.
No, we know that, but it's like, what gets me is, wow, 100 people. That's pretty good. I would have thought less would be interesting.
Yeah, he probably bought a box or two of them and gave them as stocking stuffers to the city employees. So the one, I think, positive outcome was that it resulted in Jolene Kruger Gutierrez being ousted from the Albuquerque Journal. She was the quote-unquote author of the piece, and she was a trash reporter, not even a reporter. She was a commentator mostly at the Journal. Which the Journal has plenty of trash commentators that they have, like Judith Polich and others. But they, Kruger Gutierrez was ousted because she was on the payroll of Keller, and theoretically she's supposed to be in the media and trying to cover these things somewhat objectively. We've got just a few minutes left, but we have to talk about Spaceport America. And the big news coming out of Spaceport America is you're going to be hearing a lot less news out of Spaceport America, thanks to Virgin Galactic's recent announcement that they are going to do a couple of launches in the new year, and then they are going to, by and large, abandon New Mexico, laying off 70 or so people company-wide, shifting the balance of everybody to the Phoenix Mesa area, where they are manufacturing their next generation Delta spacecraft. Actually, 185 jobs, I think that's company-wide. 18% of its current workforce, maybe 70 of those were in New Mexico, but the rest are going to be shifted to Arizona. Virgin Galactic reported $1.7 million in revenue in the third quarter from its space flight, as well as membership fees from customers. Company had a net loss of $105 million in the third quarter. That is a unsustainable business model, and we'll see what happens if they can get this Delta. Who knows if the Delta model will be more profitable than the original model that they've been using. I forget the name of it, but it's things are continuing to deteriorate with Virgin Galactic and Spaceport America.
No doubt. When they announced that their current airframe could only, fly about once a month, it was kind of game over as a business. And then it's not surprising that they're switching to try to develop a new one. And the big one, speaking of high interest rates and what are you going to invest their money in? Can they attract enough investment to even get a new generation of spacecraft, spacecraft off the ground? And if they can't, they will not be here much longer. But it's got to be a tough sell. It's got to be a tough sell. How long they've been in the business, and then to get to where they can fly, and then they're like, oh yeah, we can't fly enough, so we need a new plane.
Yeah, and we talked about this. If you have been listening to our show, you are aware of what issues they faced. Obviously, after more than a decade of the spaceport being open, of course, the reason we care is because it was a very significant investment of your and my taxpayer dollars during the Bill Richardson administration. Uh, Counties Doña Ana and Sierra continue to pour millions of dollars annually into the upkeep and maintenance. There's still more to be done. The roof needs to be refurbished, and other uh, expenses are to be had there. So we're not, just, oh, we have spent 250 or so million dollars, maybe a little bit more than that at this point. We are continuing to spend heavily on Spaceport America. And there have been a lot of people who said, oh, now they've finally got it. They're getting off the ground. They're working seemingly safely now after some serious problems with that. And then it's back to the drawing board yet again. And that's got to be a very difficult thing to come back from after all they've already gone through. And again, I assume that the Delta is going to be a more financially salvageable or lucrative spacecraft for Virgin Galactic. But when you're launching your current spacecraft and making 1.7 million in revenue with 105 million dollars in losses, I don't know what kind of aircraft you're going to be able to make. Obviously, you're going to make it bigger so you can put more people on it, but
well, and do something to make it fly more frequently. And
yeah.
if you can't solve both of those, you're probably going to be in trouble.
Yeah, so stay tuned. We will continue to cover that. And again, this is yet another instance of politicians in New Mexico doing what they prioritize with our money that rightfully belongs in your and my pocketbooks, in businesses' pocketbooks. They come here, they create jobs, they develop an economy, not, I think I want to run for president, therefore I'm going to do something really outside the box, like build a train system, a commuter train, or a spaceport to hopefully someday have these space flights here. That's not real economic development. It ultimately sucks up taxpayer dollars, doesn't do a whole lot for the benefit of the average people of the state, and it's just a personality vanity project. Mayor Keller's book being yet another, although much cheaper version. So
in the future, we highly recommend books. If you have to do a vanity project, do a book.
Yes, you can really cut the costs by doing a book. So lastly, City of Albuquerque spent $80,231.98 on Joe Biden's trip to Albuquerque back in August. We don't have a problem with the number, but we do have a problem when Mayor Keller whines and moans about Donald Trump visiting Albuquerque and the expenses that he incurred on his trip of $211,000 or so dollars. Yes, Trump's was a campaign visit. Yes, Biden is the sitting president, but you know what? Every trip a president makes is a campaign trip. They're just doing it on the taxpayer dime using Air Force One. If you want to create a public policy or some kind of handy guide for what is expensable and what is on the campaign or the federal government, that is a fine thing to do. Have city council sit down and make that policy. But by and large, when a president shows up or a president running for election shows up, they're going to incur certain expenses. Just because you like Biden and don't like Donald Trump doesn't mean that you should treat their expenses differently. So that was a records request we asked for way back in August when Biden came, but the wheels of the Records Act move very slowly.
And unless I'm mistaken, that $211,000 or whatever it was from Trump remains unpaid to the city of Albuquerque.
Yes, Keller invoiced the Trump campaign, and he made it a point even on the Daily Show with Jon Stewart that he didn't expect to get paid. I don't think, especially given Trump's legal quandaries and legal bills that are a little more pressing, that we will ever see a dime of that money. Not a surprise. And again, as much as I dislike subsidizing politicians of either party, we do want these people to show up and darken our doorstep. That's one of the reasons the Electoral College exists in the first place. Obviously, we're already dealing with legislators who want to get rid of the Electoral College. We won't have to pay that security expense if the Electoral College were to go away, because they'll just fly right over New Mexico. Anyway, that's this week, and we will, of course, be back doing the regular thing during Thanksgiving week. We will talk to you then. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.